we have a VF sedan here, and this car's had a chassis rail sleeve put on it at some stage, but it hasn't really been fitted the best way. Also too, as you can see, the alignment, this is supposed to be snugged a little bit closer, about here. All this is sort of hanging very low, as you can see through here. So there's a big gap here. This is not really how it should be, this big gap. So when you bolt the K-frame down, as you can see, the K-frame here has sort of made a depression in here as it's been bolted up. And the reason why is because this hasn't been snugged up very, very close. So from what I can see, the rail has been repaired, but then instead of welding it, they've just used some sort of sealer, some sort of urethane sealer across the top of the rail instead of actually doing a proper repair. So it's not really how I used to do them. This is a repair we don't do anymore. No one sleeves the rail anymore. So now the way we do it is we actually cut and remove the rusted section and then weld in all new plate steel. And what we do is we overlap the steel on the inside, so that way if we do get a crack in the rail again, the crack won't follow if you have a bracket in behind it. So the bracket will stop a crack from going any further. Also too, it's all plug welded through. This has got plug welds in it, but I'm not really sure how much of it's plug weld and how much of it's filler. So all this here, you can see this is supposed to be welded, but it seems to be a bit of weld, a bit of filler, or whatever this sort of funny flexible solution is. But this is not how we do rail repairs anymore. This is an old way of doing rail repairs. So what we're going to do, fortunately enough, it's not welded on in a lot of spots. It's got a little bit of weld here, it's got a little tiny bit of weld there, and it's got a little tiny bit of weld here and here, and a bit of weld across the top of the steering box here. So if we cut it through here, cut this off across down here, cut this little V out here, like that, and cut this section off like that through to the original box, but obviously very carefully, because usually they're not too rusty in this section here. They normally rust between here and here. So this is probably the area that we don't want to damage this steel if we can. The reason why these rust so badly is because from the factory, they've got an American A-body frame. So what they've done to compensate for right-hand drive is they've converted and flipped the steering box to this side, and what they did is they put some gussets through in sections like this through the rail, and problem is the water comes through these little spots here in the top of the rail, and it gets water inside here, and then it starts to rust. So as you can see through here, this is all open, so you can go right through inside the rail. These are two plates of steel welded together. Oh, it's just a bit of crud, but
I'm just trying to get it in there for the...
yeah.
Not very good.
No, it's a bit oily as well. The steering box was leaking a lot. So fortunately enough, this side's welded a lot more than the other side is, because the other side's got next to nothing. So it's going to make it fairly easy to remove the rail. Not super easy, it's still going to be hard. So basically all these bits are going to be cut, and then you're going to sort of pry it and flex it over the top.
Just for me to get it right, the water runs in here, through the top here, gets stuck.
No, through the two pieces of steel. There's two.
Yep.
It's like a cup.
Yep.
Within a big cup.
Right.
And what happens is the moisture and dirt slips in between, gathers inside here, and then creates rust.
And because they've made these gussets,
It can't get out.
it gets stuck there, whereas originally, without these gussets there, it would just run down and come out of the rail further down through the holes.
Yes.
And because it gets stuck there and it's wet and dirty, it rusts it out.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So hence the reason why we tend to, when we repair it, we use galvanized steel as much as possible. Use galvanized steel brackets inside here. We make sure, say as an example, this is the new piece of steel that we're welding in that's flush. We have an overlapping piece of steel behind it, and it'll have plug welds in it. So plug weld there, to distribute between the welded surface. So that way, on the off chance that it does crack, it's still got these plug welds to hold it together.
And it's not like when it's one solid stitched weld running all the way along the top.
Yeah.
It's sort of like when you've got a bit of clothing and you want to tear it up, and you cut it along the stitching and you start to tear it, it'll tear all the way up. If there's a gap between the welds, it'll only tear to the end of the weld and then stop, and it won't tear the rest of the welds.
I used to see these rail repairs welded all the way around, and the problem was with welding them all the way around is they'd start to crack here, and then they'd run up the crack and then run all the way along the edge of the crack.
Yeah.
And then you ended up with 10 times the amount of work of trying to repair it. So I have had to repair a rail that was fully welded, and it was a nightmare of a job. So preferably, if you're ever putting a sleeve on, don't fully weld it. Do an inch weld, gap, inch weld, gap, inch weld, or 25 mil gap, 25 mil gap, such and such, inch, 25 mil. But anyway, so that's what we have to do to remove this. And once we remove this, then we'll be able to see how they've repaired the rail, even if they've repaired the rail at all. But you can see there's some gouges.
Because you can't just put a sleeve over the top. You're supposed to fix and cut out all the rust underneath, yes?
You can put a sleeve on a rail.
But
There's no problem with putting sleeves on rails. But you have to repair what's there before, because otherwise you're just putting a piece of steel that's going to rust over the top of a piece of steel that's going to rust.
yeah, and
So-
how many times have we seen that?
Yeah, plenty of times. So
There's not many jobs that we get in here that are regular run-of-the-mill jobs, but this is
Isn't
one
regular.
of them.
This is a
Run-of-the-mill
regular.
jobs. I reckon Shane could just about make chassis rails in his sleep.
yeah, yeah.
So-
So it's a time-consuming job, as you can see, because it's a V8 car. We've had to remove the extractors, steering boxes had to come out, K-frames had to come completely out.
So,
It's a major job. It's a major job. It's not a 5-minute job.
K-frame, the motor's supported by an engine hoist at the top.
Yeah, we've got a cradle that sits across the top of the engine that supports
Yep.
the weight of the engine. But also too, when you
Shane's going to have to unpick this side of the rail, of course,
yeah,
as well.
the one thing that's always missed when doing rails is you can do a rail 10 times or 20 times or 50 times or 100 times. Every time you go to re-weld it in, the rail's going to move. And what you've got to do is you've got to take measurements before of the opposite side and this side with your hoist in its stationary position, and make sure that when you repair it, that everything goes back into the same position. Fortunately enough with this one, because they've put obviously welds all the way across here, what it's done is it's shrunk the bottom of the rail, and it's actually pulled this rail down 5 mil. So our job, once we finish all this, is we're going to jack up this corner as we weld the new section in to get it back to that 5 mil higher where it's supposed to be. So that way the car's straight. But at the same time, while we do that, we actually have to lift it, because as you weld shrinks the metal. So you actually have to lift it a little bit higher before you actually start welding it. So that way, because it's going to shrink again, because if you just lift it to the same position where it's supposed to be, which is the same as the other side, and you start welding it, it'll pull down that 5 mil again. So what we're going to do is we're going to do all our repairs, get it all done, and then do our front and rear weld and our weld across the top with it lifted slightly. So what we'll do next is Big Al's going to cut all these sections out that I've marked. He's going to remove the rail, and then we'll keep you updated as to what's behind it, and then we'll go from there. This is the VF sedan that we're repairing for a guy up in Queensland. We did Boo, which is his wife's car. Now we're just at the section where we're about to close it all up. So we've cut all the rot out, and I've welded all the new section in, of obviously keeping in mind that we've got to have it all level so that when we grind it down it's nice and smooth. The material thickness is the same material thickness of the steel that was there before. So all these little cross-section braces that we've got in here, obviously we've got to put a cross tube in through here for our steering box, as well as we've got to weld this in because this is our anchor nut, and obviously
The anchor nut for
the K-frame, this is the anchor nut for the K-frame, so we have to weld that in. But we can't do that until basically I sit the other side on, tack it in a couple of spots, and then I've got to sit the K-frame on and drill the hole. And once I've drilled the hole, then I can put the nut in and weld the nut in. So it's sort of a hard one, this one, when you're doing these, because obviously if you don't get this nut square, it makes it really hard to bolt up, as well as it'll never sit sort of straight. Now all these little V-cuts that we've got in here, they're obviously to let rubbish pass its way through. So later on, because they do fill up with garbage, so what you do is you can just put your hose up through here and just run your hose flat out, and it will just flush anything down through, and it'll come out one of the holes, one of the two holes in the base of the rail, and get rid of any mess. This rail was full of two things. It was full of rust and engine oil, so it made it interesting. We had to clean it all up before we could do any welding. So the paint sort of hides a lot of the welds, as you can see here. If you're close up here, this is welds that I've done, and you can see the weld. If I rub my finger on it because it's dirty, you can see what it looks like from the other side. This one here, I double welded it, so just to show you what it looks like if you double weld it, is just in case you want to double weld. You don't have to. The weld's plenty strong enough that you do on the other side, as long as it penetrates through like what you can see there. These little cross-section braces get plug welded in. I'll grab the other section. So this here, obviously that's the inside because we can't paint that once it's on. This is a weld through primer, so that'll sit up into here as such once it's all sort of clamped. Now you see I've left a little gap all the way around. If I've got a little gap all the way around, I've got something to build up, so that way we know we've got plenty of weld in it. So, and then once it's all done and clamped in and welded up, then I can weld all my plug welds. So, and that's sort of what it looks like. So there's nothing really more to talk about on a rail repair other than this. Everyone has their own little different ways of doing it. This is one of the ways I like to do it. I just don't want to ever have to do it again. Hence the reason why we use galvanized steel. I know it's a lot harder to weld galvanized steel, but you can weld it. And then once it's all done, it's all painted inside and out. Then what I do is I spray a fogged mist of Fisherline all the way through the rail, and it just gets into all those little spots that you can't get to with the spray gun. When they were welding these together from factory, that was one of the issues. You know, they were painted inside, but not really well.
they were just misted.
Well, they were just bare minimum paint just to get them through.
If it was late on a Friday afternoon and it was near knockover,
Well,
you
yeah.
might not have
Had
gotten
enough paint. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So basically, that's what it looks like. It's not really pretty to see, but all these braces have their reason. Obviously, there's braces where the top wishbone goes. They're pretty important. There's a few extra braces that we put in just to, you know, give a little bit more rigidity. The original braces that were inside were a lot thinner material. I've decided to use the same material, the same as I do with most of them, as the strength of the rail. A lot of people say you should go heavier and go a thicker steel, but I have found in the past going a thicker steel, if that section is too rigid, what it'll start doing is it'll flex outside the area and then it can crack the welds. So we don't want to do that. We've ensured everything by doing all these extra little plug welds and everything to try and stop any sort of future cracking, and hence the reason why we've got these plates that are sort of crossed over. So they carry across the two pieces of metal, and we cut both sides different. So we don't cut everything the same. So this cut is like here, the cut on the other steel's like that, The one on this side is cut up like this, and the one on this side is cut like that. The reason why we do that is so it avoids cracking in the future. So the last thing I want to do...
You're not applying the same pressure to
Yes.
both sides of the rail.
That's right. So the reason why we do it this way is just for that reason. Only for engineering, so that way we never have to worry about a customer driving down the road and their front end cracks or something goes wrong in an accident. So we've kept the same rigidity as what it had from factory, and that way we don't have to worry about in case of an accident as well too. And that's another thing to think about in an accident. If this is all rigid, you've only got these little areas that are going to crush from here to here, and then all of a sudden you've got all the way through the cabin,
Which is where we're sitting.
which is where you're sitting. If this is too rigid and it doesn't collapse, where's it going to collapse? Where you're sitting. And that's the last place you want it to collapse. So it'll ruin your weekend if it collapses where you're sitting.
I think so. Oh,
So hence the reason why we do it this way. But you know what? Anyone can do it their own way. We like to do it this way. It is a lot of work, I must admit. It's not an easy job.
And the next time I'm filming, this should all be linished back and
Yes, so
ready.
what we...
So the whole purpose of this is so that you don't notice that there's been a rail repair.
Yeah, so basically, this is probably one of the worst rail repairs I've ever had to do. They don't usually get this bad.
Which makes it a very good example for everybody
Yeah,
as well.
yeah. So normally I only do about a section about that big, or maybe to about here. Not usually all the way down to here, but all this area here was peppered with holes. I'll show you a sample of it. I've got a sample over here. Now, another thing that was unusual about this car is we actually had a crack that went up through the roof of the rail. You don't normally get a crack that goes all the way around, but I'll explain why. So this is the rail repair that they've done. So this box section here is what they've forced inside the rail. Now what's happened, that's a lot more rigid than the steering box. And what it's started to do is it's actually cracked all the way through here. We've just tacked the crack together here in a couple of spots just to hold it so we could make a template, but it actually cracked all the way around. And the reason why it had cracked because of this box section.
Because it was too rigid.
It was too rigid in a spot. And this is the reason why I explain to people, if you're going to repair a rail, don't do a rail repair with thicker metal, because you'll end up with this scenario. It actually cracked all the way across the top through here, which I've very rarely seen. So, but as you can see from inside the rail, it's pretty bad. So,
Yeah. Oh,
and through the bottom, that's another part of the box, and they plated all here, but it had just started to fall apart. It's rusted all the way through here. It was quite bad. Like, we probably didn't need to go this far, but as you can see some pitting through this area through here.
well,
So that's what made me decide to replace it.
because you can't weld to pour steel.
No. Well, see, you can see it here. There was holes all the way along, and every time we poked something in where it looked a bit spotty with rust, it just poked through, and you could see it had some odd repairs here and there where it had cracked. So there's another crack here as well. This is our rail repair. It was welded up through here. You can just see little spots here and there between the welds. So as I said, the rail was done in two halves. So this is the cap for this side welded in. That's it. It's sort of finished sort of result of what it looks like all done. So there's a seam that runs all the way underneath, all the way through here, all the way down to here. It's welded up through here. There's some little slight marks where the weld was cut off before, just through here, off for the sleeve, but that's sort of what it looks like. Now, next thing we're going to do is paint it. So this is the undercoat. So sort of spray all the edges that are hard to get to first. Like that.
What is this stuff?
It's just a zinc weld through primer, but it's good to use as a base.
And what are you putting over the top?
And then I'm going to spray just a light coat of sand deadener, and that'll do it. So, but we've got to wait for this to dry. It takes a few minutes to dry. You can see it's sort of already starting to dry now. But so this rail before, there's the measurement that I took in this point here. I actually marked it with a chalk line, but I've cleaned the chalk line off. Was 21.25, but the other side is 21.30, so that was to this point here. So now when we measure from the ground, now that we've got it all straight again, we've got exactly 21.30. So we've actually got it spot on. It's hard to get it spot on. Sometimes you vary by a few mil, especially because it's such a big area that we've repaired, where I actually call it luck to get it spot on. Normally you get it within 2 or 3 mil, but normally when these repairs are done, they can vary by 2 or 3 mil. But as you can see here from this measurement that we took previously, we had 21.25, only because all the amounts of weld that they put in here, it actually pulled the front end down. So my object of the game was to try and get it as accurate as I could to how it was from factory or to what it was from the other side. And we're just luck. We got it exactly within a mil. So, well, spot on. So that was pretty good.
Yep, it's fine. I'm going to use all of it anyway.
Alright.
Just watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like and leave a comment below. If you want to see more videos like this one, subscribe and click the notification bell so that it lets you know when we've popped up a new video. And if you reckon the merch that the crew at Belly Grunt's wearing is pretty cool and would like to get some for yourself, then click on the link in the description. See you next time.